I never thought I would like get to this point, but yeah, I used to be religious, and this is that story. The point of this video is not to make fun of or, demean people of religion or anything. It's just personally not for me. And if you want to hear my story, I'm like, let's get into these. If you're still Mormon or you're still like LDS, I'm gonna say Mormon because, bro, that's how I was raised. I ain't saying the whole name, it's too long. Then just watch the video with caution. Once again, I'm not trying to make anyone upset, I'm just giving my experience. And here we go. Most of you probably know that I'm kind of religious because I've had videos in the past where it's like my Draw My Life series. And there was an emphasis on the religion aspect of my life. But, I'll get more into it as I go on. But yeah, little Sugar was born into a Mormon family. It's not like I had any other choice. I had to be Mormon. My parents were Mormon, their parents were Mormon, and so on. We were just the standard, typical, goody Mormon family that followed all the rules, all the shebang. But even as a kid, there was part of me that, didn't really vibe with church in any way, but I really had no choice. I had to go. So there was a lot of things that I was taught as a kid that really didn't make any sense. Some of them had to do with race, some of them had to do with women's roles in the family and men's roles. And when I was in second grade, I was questioning everything. I don't want to bore you guys with the details about, what the Mormon faith is all about, but just imagine like Christianity and then you add like an extra book to it and then you add some like OCD rules to it. That's pretty much Mormonism. But yeah, a few things in my childhood that really stood out was this idea that when everyone goes to heaven, they all turn white. That was a teaching taught to me as a child, and I went to a school where there was people of all different races. Like we had Asian, we had like Samoan, we had different types, and I would sit there in second grade thinking like trying to picture them as white, and it just made no sense, and I didn't want them to be white either. I thought their features were fine, and I was just so confused. And modern day Mormons would say, well, we don't teach that or anything. Well, okay, I was taught that as a kid, and one thing you're gonna notice when I'm telling the story is that the Mormon faith tends to change a lot about its rules, about its teachings, and it's very subtle, and you really don't notice it unless you pay attention. As a young girl, I was taught women were supposed to be submissive to men, and that made no sense to me because men and women were going to school. We were doing the same exact things, but whenever I returned home, it was automatic. Oh, because you're a girl, you need to clean up after the men while they just sit there. And I always thought that there was something wrong with that. And deep down, I knew my nature wasn't really submissive in that way. I kind of see like men and women as equals and that we should be working together. And so that was like a strong belief I held as a child. And that's still one that I hold today. The whole submission thing is so cringe to me. I don't know if I'm alone on that. But yeah, as a second grader, I was seriously thinking about all these things. And I came to the conclusion that my life would be so much better if I was not Mormon. There's a teaching I was taught that, if you're born into the religion, like you're special and you're chosen, but if you leave the religion after being born into it, you're deemed as very bad, and like in the next life, you're pretty much a son of perdition. It's kind of like the Mormon equivalent to, going to hell kind of thing. And so as a kid, I was like, well, dang, can't I just live a normal life and then find the church when I'm older? Like, wouldn't that be better? I was envious of other kids that didn't have to do religion or go to church or anything like that. And in my time, church was 3 hours long, dude. And now it's 2, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, as a kid, church was so boring and so long, and I dreaded going there, and I was socially anxious, undiagnosed autistic, and it was just, it was hell. It was awful. Luckily, I had art. That was really the only way I could get through anything, especially how boring church is. I would just sit on the pews, doodling away, probably drawing ponies or dragons or something like that. Super autistic, by the way. I would just keep drawing the same dragon over and over and over. It was the only thing I knew how to draw. But there came to a point in my childhood where I sat on the pews, and maybe I was like 12 or something. And I was thinking to myself, like, I just have to make myself believe this because it's true. What they're telling me, I assume is true. It's not like I can visit other religions or even have friends that aren't religious because of how, I had controlling parents kind of thing. Because I had very controlling parents, I was not really allowed to make friends with other people. Like, they had to be Mormon in order for my parents to trust them, in order for me to, like, go over to their house. I can count on my hand how many times I was left to visit my friends that weren't Mormon, and that really put a detriment on my socializing skills. And it would really suck because I would make friends at church. It's not like I was incapable, but it's kind of funny because I swear that they were autistic too. But they would never last because we lived in California and it's really expensive there. So I would make friends for like a month and then, they would have to move because they just couldn't afford rent. And so childhood really sucked in the church because I was only allowed to be friends with Mormons and none of them liked me. And there's nothing wrong with any of those people in my past. I was neurodivergent. I'm sure I was obnoxious. I just wanted to talk about SpongeBob, okay? Like, I was a very innocent little kid for too long, and I'm sure they didn't really appreciate that. But yeah, I was forced to go to church. I was forced to go to a place where no one liked me there, and I was bullied. And, that really sucked. That really did not help me develop at all. Because my beliefs in the church were so strong, like, I assumed one day, these are God's chosen people. I'll get along with them someday. And bro, I was like future faking myself. That Anyway, by the time I got to 16, I had completely given up on, like, ever making friends in the church, and, it was a long time coming. But yeah, growing up, I did primary, I, sang songs about the temple, and I went to Mutual with all the other kids. And being a kid, my parents taught me to basically proselytize to my friends at school, which that makes you a social weirdo. Religious parents need to stop teaching their kids to do that because it just makes you a social pariah. Like, you're just a strange child. Like, I had to invite my friend to Mutual, which is like an activity where all the church kids, go on like a Wednesday and they do some diddly-do kind of thing. And I had to ask my friend to come with me, and all she wanted to do was watch Pokemon, which is, very child appropriate, but I had to be the weirdo being like, hey, you want to come to my church? Like, no, no. And I grew up with 9 siblings, and so there was like 10 of us. And that's really just because of the Mormons' teachings of, multiply and replenish the earth. Bro, there's like 8 billion humans. I think we need to stop. Is there like a cap on how much we should, procreate? Because that seems like a little much. This seems a little high. But because I had that many siblings, my whole life was about my siblings. I'm the second oldest of 10. And I just was not allowed to do anything as a kid. So please, if you're considering having 10 kids, don't. It is the absolute worst. I can't even begin to tell you how awful that is. But this story's not about that. So let's just move past that. And by the way, I'm not talking about my siblings because I love them all. My siblings. When you're Mormon, your whole life revolves around the church. When you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that's the whole name. It's very long. You do activities, you hang out with your community. Basically, they are your community. So it's very tribalistic. If you're going to date someone, they should be Mormon. You want to Or, you could flirt to convert. That was a classic phrase said in the church by its members. Dating is like super restrictive too, and depending on your parents, because I know some Mormon parents are very lenient when it comes to it. My parents weren't. The church kind of tells you to not date till you're 16, but before then you have like no experience. So if you follow that, like when you get to like 16, you just panic. That's at least what happened to me, I'm just talking from personal experience. I had made a male friend at school, and he was very kind and very, like, awesome towards me. And when I turned 16, he was really excited to date me. And when I went to my parents about it, they were like, well, is he Mormon? Like, is he perfect enough? And I just panicked and I clammed up and I told him, like, we can't date. And, he stopped talking to me or whatever, which I kind of regret. But I just had no backing when it came to that stuff because it was all very centered around the church. So everything was very restricted. But dating is kind of funny when it comes to Mormons because even in college, people go around saying things like 4 on the floor, like, keep all your legs on the floor. You don't want to be on top of each other kind of thing. It's very pure, very innocent, goober type stuff. But yeah, I would say because of the social isolation and the restriction on who could be friends with me, I started really clamming up as a person and just taking on whatever qualities the church would teach is what, women should be. So I started to heavily disassociate at a very young age. In Mormonism, you're taught to live for the celestial kingdom, or, as Christians would say, heaven. And when you do that, you become disconnected from reality. There are essentially 3 tiers to heaven in Mormonism, and the top is celestial, then you got the terrestrial, then you got the telestial, then you have outer darkness, which is not hell, but it's kind of hell. And in order to make it to the celestial kingdom, you have to be married, you have to go through the temple, you have to do a lot of things. You want to be like at that premium heaven, all right? Premium. And so my goals as a person really came down to whatever the church was telling me to do. And I knew that it was like going against my own nature, going against my own ideals. But at a certain point, it's like my brain kind of split on it. I was taught that God and Satan are like constantly in your mind giving you thoughts. And any good thoughts are coming from God, any bad thoughts are coming from Satan. And that really messed me up. Because turns out I have ADHD and my brain does not seem to like producing dopamine at all. So the whole time, throughout my whole childhood, I was suffering heavily. Even saying that out loud kind of makes me teary-eyed a little bit, thinking about little sugar. And being autistic did not help. I'm like super sensitive to sound and lights and just everything. So I constantly felt like I was being spiritually attacked or spiritually targeted because, people didn't like me because I was autistic. Like, that's a real freaking struggle. But the church and leaders around me would just say things like, wow, Shannon, you're so spiritual, you're so deep. But the peers my age hated my guts. They hated me so much. And I just felt alone, and it's like, oh, is God testing me? He's putting me in a test. Like, I hate that part of religion when religion teaches people that. It's like, what is a test? What is not a test? What is a trial? Because me being, sad and depressed all the time, that had nothing to do with anything I was doing in my life. That had everything to do with my brain chemistry that needed help. So anyway, I did all the steps, all the Mormon things you do. You go to girls' camp and you do Young Women in Excellence. Like, I can still recite the poem that they teach to the girls. Kind of wild when you hear the girls say it because it's like saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And something like, we are daughters of our Heavenly Father who loves us and we love Him. We will stand as witnesses of God at all times, in all things, in all places, as we strive to live the young women values, which are faith, divine nature, individual worth, knowledge, choice and accountability, good works, integrity, and virtue. And I wouldn't say like everything in the church is bad because those attributes I really took to heart because I'm like super straight laced, super goody goody, and I'm like, what, virtue and being trustworthy, and I like that. That's some great stuff. Yeah, my family was super into it. We prayed every night. My parents held family home evening every week, which sucked because we had so many kids and it would take hours and it was so boring. Like, church was already 3 hours long, and then we would come home and like have family home evening for like another 3 hours. Sundays were all church event, I swear. But yeah, I was never given a choice of whether I could go to church or not, and I developed like high anxiety. I would get really ill before going to church, but my parents never really cared about that. Like, even if I was ill, they would still send me to school, kind of deal. I would say I was very disconnected from my body because I was suffering so much, but people around me were just like, oh, if you pray, you'll be okay. I would go to school ill, I would go to church ill, and I would just be like, at school, horking it in the trash can. But as long as I had that ideal of the celestial kingdom in my head, I could get through anything. It's essentially learning how to have a high pain tolerance, which I do, and I have a high, like, suffer tolerance, I guess, because I'm still kicking it. I'm still here after 2 suicide attempts. So, the older I got, the things, reality came crashing down on me. My role in the church as a woman is to get married and have the childrens and have the posterity and be a housewife and all that. And that's still something I genuinely would like to do in this economy. I don't know about that. You gotta give me some stacks or something to do that. I was getting older and I was like panicking because I wasn't dating anyone. I now realize I was kind of more focused on surviving, like, all my brain garbage and, undiagnosed disorders and stuff, and I was just trying to survive, being neglected, because we had little kids. Those were more important than any older kids. I really wasn't granted the time to develop as a person naturally because as a woman and an older sister, I pretty much cared for the kids like a second mom. Like, I gave them all baths and stuff, and I was constantly doing chores to my own detriment. And the few times I did explode because I'm a woman, they put all the chores on me solely, which, yeah, I had like huge autistic meltdowns after a while. But I would constantly, hold back and bite my tongue and just take it because having kids is what women do, and this was my life. I would like babysit my siblings all the time. It's not like I got paid for it, but I wanted to give my parents a break. But, they're the ones that had 10 kids because of the church's influence. I don't know, it's all a mess. And I remember at 12 years old, I was holding one of my siblings and they were just crying, and I was trying to, cradle them and, try to get them to sleep kind of deal. And I was just thinking, like, no one is coming for me. Like, no one is going to save me. Like, I'm all alone and no one really cares. But in the church, there's like a huge emphasis on, sibling bonds and being a really amazing, younger or older sibling and camaraderie, whatever. What's valued more than hanging out with your family is serving your church and serving your callings. Because if you do that, then God's gonna bless you more. But I think taking parents away from their kids like that to do these like really extensive callings where, they're visiting people throughout the week and they're, doing their calling on Sunday, just completely stripped away from their kids. I don't think that that's great. And I think people with kids, especially in the church, need that time with their kids. Like, they can't be serving these highly intense callings that demand a lot of their time. The lack of parental direction, it became like the church became my parents. As long as I felt that, God was on my side and I was doing everything I could to be in his favor, then I would be okay. And that's where my mental health really lied, was in that connection with God, and I thought it was like a really good connection. It at least kept me surviving. I was getting older and I was a little worried because I wasn't really dating anyone once again, and I like I said, I didn't know I was too focused on surviving instead. But as a woman in that church, it's like if you're 21 and you're unmarried, like, bro, what is wrong with you? And I was getting to like 19 and I had never even dated anyone by that time. And I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't, gonna do anything wrong. I was super goody-goody. And because I wasn't finding any like men I really wanted to date or anything, I decided I should go on a mission. Maybe I'll meet some guy there and, form some kind of connection. I went to my bishop and I said, hey, I want to serve a mission in this church. And I was a little too honest about how I felt about the church. And it wasn't bad. Like, it was good. I was explaining, how much struggles I've been through, but, God was always by my side. And the bishop at the time, he was like, oh, you're completely like unstable. You can't go on a mission. And I was dumbfounded by this because at that point, I had believed strongly in the church. I had somehow eased my own fears away about it. And I was really dedicated to the church. I went to church every Sunday. I did everything that the church expected me to do. I tried being like submissive or whatever. And when the bishop rejected me, I was like confused and hurt. And I realized that like in order to get things done in the church, you can't really be honest all the time. And they're not looking for honest. So the second time I had a new bishop. And when I went to him to say like, hey, can I go on a mission? I just made it the most bland explanation. I was just like, I want to serve my church. And the bishop was like, well, howdy doody, let's do it. At that time, I was dealing with, it was like my body was like collapsing in on me, but I wasn't trained. I wasn't taught to really care about signs of suffering. I was taught to just suffer through it. So my legs started to have problems. I had like plantar fasciitis, but I didn't know. So by the time I went to the temple, I was like in pain, but I just kind of didn't really care. But yeah, the temple was quite an experience. As a kid, you're taught that the temple is this mystical, magical place where God comes down and his soul, his spirit resides in it. So you grow up singing songs about the temple because you're gonna go there one day. You're gonna get married. Like, it has to be in the temple. The temple is the place where you make covenants with God, and it's super deep and super spiritual. And the temple's not like a church. You have to get special permission to go. You have to be like very good. You have to do a bunch of things before you go. You have to get a recommend. Like, you have a little clearance card essentially to get in. And I didn't take any temple classes before, and even if I did, the ceremonies are so sacred that they're not even going to tell you what's inside, so you can't really consent to what's going to happen. But my parents did this, my grandparents did that, so of course I have to do it too. And before you go on a mission, usually people that go to the temple and get their covenants done, usually they're about to get married. But if you go on a mission, you can go to the temple as well. Even though you're still single, you need the priesthood. So you need to go like into the temple. And the priesthood is power bestowed for men because men rule over women. So I went to the temple, and one of the covenants that you make is to abide by your husband as he abides by God. So essentially that's kind of like a tier tower where God's at the top, your husband is next, then you're below your husband, and your children are below you, kind of thing. I didn't have a husband, but I was still able to make that covenant as if it's going to happen in the future, which is kind of strange. As a kid, I really wanted to go to the temple because you get a new name, and I thought it was going to be like, you go there and you get this like ancient sounding name or something like that, but no, there's like a list of 30 names each month that they use and they reuse. So that's That's just goofy. I don't know. But yeah, my first time at the temple, I was horrified because at church, the church is pretty modern. Like nothing too weird happens. Like yeah, they're OCD about rules and they're kind of like hypocrites when it comes to them, but I mean that's most churches, let's be real. But the temple, that stuff what didn't make sense to me cuz I was under the impression that we made fun of like every other religion that had culty like rituals. The temple is nothing like churches. They told me beforehand that you get tokens in the temple, and I was like, oh, is it like coins? Like maybe you present coins to the veil, and then the person behind the veil will let you in or something. But no, you receive these tokens and signs, and it's like really random like handshakes that you learn and you perform. And one of them is actually you cup your hands as if you like slit your own bowels. And that part of the ceremony is kind of removed. So if you don't know why you're cupping your hand, you don't actually know what you're doing. So that's like lost in translation at this point. So first, when you get to the temple, they have you strip down and they have you put on this like thin fabric over yourself and you're like completely naked underneath, and you get what's called the initiatories, and they drop oil on your head, they give you some prayers and whatnot, and then you're able to start wearing your garments. And garments are like this like underwear that Mormons wear, and it's pretty much just like a shirt and shorts, and they come down to your knees, and there's like some symbols on them. You know, one of them means, you know, you gotta kneel down to pray, and the other one's like over the heart kind of thing. They're super OCD if you ever want to throw away your garments. You're supposed to cut out the symbols, and I guess you burn it or something like that, but a little too OCD if you ask me. But with these garments, like as a woman, you can't really wear anything flattering. It has to be super modest, and even modest things cannot make the cut because then your garments are kind of poking out, and you know, other members are like, hey, I can see your garment line kind of deal. But then you're taken into this auditorium for what's known as the endowment, and you watch a video about how the world was made, and Adam is actually Michael, the angel, which, what? It seems to be like a leftover theory of Adam being God kind of thing that kind of got mixed up. Because in our text, like it never says anything about Adam, you know, the first man on earth is also the angel Michael. Like, what? And it's like Jesus and Michael, and they create the world under God's directions, which, huh? I don't know, Jesus created the world. But yeah, if any Mormons are listening to this, like I saw the pink heaven first. So if you know what that video is with the pink pillars and stuff. And honestly, it put me to sleep. I was in pain. My body was not functioning. I did not have dopamine. Like, bro, I was dying. And I felt so guilty that I kind of fell asleep through the video because it's very boring. There's like, day one, we're gonna, you know, form the earth. And it's like, okay. And it's so long. And you wear these weird clothes in the temple too, which, like I said before, it's like the church makes fun of every other culture because they're not like modern, and yet they're doing this in their own temples, which is very, huh? And then when you first go to the temple, they have the newcomers become part of the prayer circle, and everyone gets in a circle and they put their elbows on each other's like shoulders, they put their arms up and stuff, and they all say a prayer as like the officiator will like read stuff out, and then you say it back. I was horrified. I'm like, what are we doing here? And there's part of the temple ceremony where you put your hands up and then you put them down, and you say like, hear the words of my mouth 3 times. And that part was freaking me out. Like, why are we saying something 3 times? Like it's a spell, like we're casting a spell on people. And then later, you go up to the veil and you say a bunch of stuff that you have to memorize. And apparently, like, this is what's supposed to happen, like, in the next life in heaven. That you're supposed to have all these secret handshakes and signs and and tokens and sayings, and you're supposed to present your new name, which is just one of the 30 names that they have for men and women. And then you go into the celestial room, which is a very pristine room, like very calming, very soothing. It's full of crystals, very expensive, very clean, very white. And that's probably like the best part of the temple ceremony, is because you're just chilling there. You're just relaxing. That's probably like the most spiritual you're gonna feel, because it's just a quiet, serene, peaceful place where everyone is just really, keeps it really down low, just really nice. And like the San Diego temple is very beautiful. It's like 2 stories in that room, and it's full of crystals, and yeah, you're gonna feel spiritual by being in a room like that. If anything, I wish modern life had some area like that, where I guess the equivalent would be like a library, but if only we could have a space like that where it's like, this is the meditation room, because that's essentially what the temple is. And when I was told about the temple, they're like, you can ask any question in the temple, and my autistic booty hole really thought that meant like I could ask them any questions about anything. And one of the biggest problems I had with Mormonism, even though I was still a member, was polygamy, because polygamy is taught to be the new and everlasting covenant. Like in heaven, we don't have just one heavenly mother, like we have many heavenly mothers, and as a role for women, it's our job to be essentially incubators and just birth a bunch of spirit children for one God. And as a kid, I would always admonish myself for being super upset about that. Anytime polygamy would be brought up, I would get really upset, because I'm not polyamorous. Like, I'm a one and done kind of person. If I can ever find someone, like, I'm not gonna, like, be with more than one person. And I know Mormons don't practice polygamy in modern day, but they did when Joseph Smith founded the church, because Joseph Smith just wanted to have everyone. He wanted all the women for himself, but we'll get into that later. So I'm going through the temple thinking I could ask any question. So I go to my parents and I'm like, so why was like polygamy a thing? And they look at me dumbfounded, like I just asked the most random question, which I guess technically it was. And then I just, I shut that thought down and I pretended like I didn't say anything. And I was like, oh, they meant you can ask, like, if you're questioning what happened in the temple, that's what they meant. So awkward. Stupid autistic literal brain took that as an invitation to ask some hard questions about the church, and that was not the time or place. But even after the temple, even though I was like super into religion at the time, I still was honest about how I felt, and I told my parents, like, I was horrified by the temple. I did not like that. But once again, you're taught to ignore your gut instinct and like, oh, it's just Satan trying to manipulate you, trying to tell you and steer you in the wrong direction. It's not actually how you feel about it, because it's just Satan's influence. He's trying to ruin your life, okay? So I ignore my intuition, of course, and I go on a mission. And if you watched my Draw Your Life series, you saw how terrible that was. Yeah, my first companion was abusive, but I don't hold it against her because she was young and, like, I was autistic and I get it. Like, we did not click. She was kind of like a narcissist, but like I said, I give her a pass because she was a kid too. Like, we were both 19, 20. That's, you're barely an adult and it's fine. Like, we're done with that. We don't need to go over that stuff again. And a few people when they watched those videos thought like I was making stuff up, or, you know, stuff about my mission president and whatnot. But no, they were both abusive too. They were like narcissists. It was so bad. They didn't want me to get along with anyone. They just saw me as a problem, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was suffering, but doctors were having struggles trying to figure out what my problem was, because I had too many problems. Because once again, I was taught my whole life to ignore any pain I was experiencing, any psychological discomfort I was experiencing, because it all didn't matter, because, endure to the end, get to the celestial kingdom. That's what truly mattered. So even on my mission, they had me like see a psychologist, and I'm not gonna get too much into that, because that psychologist, it's like he automatically knew what was wrong with me, which was funny. He clocked my booty hole. But at that time, I had too many problems, and I did not need to go through my childhood trauma either. So let's skip that. But yeah, the mission crushed me because my mission president essentially told me that I was going against the Lord's will by coming home, but I was dealing with a brain that wasn't producing dopamine. Like, I could not be happy even if I tried. And I was dealing with bodily problems like my legs, and it was like causing me so much stress. I felt like I was dying, because like I kind of was. But like I said before, God was all I had. So if you're telling me like God essentially hates me, I have nothing. I have nothing. Give me a second. I essentially had nothing at that point. Nothing keeping me going or any reason to try anymore. Cause I felt guilty, because I never found like some guy on the mission to be my husband or whatever. And that's really the only reason I went on a mission, because oops. But I would see, the people that would bully me, it seemed like they would go on their mission and they would find someone super fast and their lives were all hunky-dory, and mine just wasn't, and I never understood why. If I didn't have God and I didn't have this Mormon husband that I was supposed to have, and my dad would give me patriarchal blessings telling me like, oh, you're gonna have a husband in the next year, you're gonna meet him at school and whatever, and that would never happen. And because my worth as a Mormon woman was so strung around getting a man, like, I essentially gave up, and that's when I had my first suicide attempt. And I can't talk about the second time I did that, because it would put certain people at risk. So I can't get into specifics on the second one, but I got really lucky on my second time. Right before I attempted the second time, my brain was essentially like scrambling for anything to keep me alive. And at the time I thought it was like the spirit of God or whatever, but no, it was, my brain was desperate. Like, my body was trying to tell me things and to keep me from doing that. And essentially what happened is, my brain kind of told me like, hey, I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm right here. Like, have you ever considered self-love? And I could say at that point in my life, I had never once considered that at all. In the church, you're taught, like, the bishop gives you a calling, you're supposed to take it. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. It doesn't matter if you know you're probably not good enough for that job. It doesn't matter. Just take the job. Ignore your feelings, ignore your gut instincts, because the happiness of the group is more important than your own happiness, essentially. And it was around this time that I started learning about narcissism, and like, I was seeing it a lot in how the church is structured, and how, if you love me, keep my commandments, and if you don't keep them, well, then you're essentially damned to hell, kind of thing. And I was like, well, that's a little messed up, and how controlling the church can be about a lot of things, like appearance and garments and how you talk, how you dress, how you speak, what kind of things you like. All of your talents need to go to the church. I'm like an artist, and I always had this guilt that I wasn't, drawing for the church, and I was always trying to find ways that I could do that. But self-love, like loving myself, that's selfish, right? Selfish is bad. But no, you can't really know yourself until you start loving yourself, and it's going to be hard for you to love other people if you can't even spare any love for yourself, me letting people treat me bad or bully me and all that garbage, like, that's not me loving myself. That's me being a doormat. That's me being submissive, like, bull crap. And so I was kind of sidetracked with all the Mormon stuff. I was too busy trying to keep my own self alive. So I went on a path of, self-love and whatnot. And I'll probably talk about, how I overcame a lot of that in a different video, because I don't want to veer too far off the actual topic of this video, which is just the Mormon stuff. But yeah, even after those 2 attempts, I thought it was like the spirit talking to me, but no, bro, it was my body. My body's like, hey, I know we're like dying, but I am still trying. You are not giving up on me. That's literally all it was. It's kind of amazing how much the body can go through, and it still kicks and it still fights to survive, and I think that's amazing. But, as I was getting older and I still wasn't dating anyone, but, at that point, I'm not in the mood to date. I have other struggles going on. I was thinking, like, if I'm going to stay in this church, I need to know the facts. I need to actually sit down and read the Bible, because I had never really read the Bible that much, because the Book of Mormon is more heavily used in church and stuff. The Bible's not really used that much, which is interesting. I decided I was gonna sit down, read the Bible, read the Book of Mormon, learn the history of the church, and, really go into it. If this was supposed to be my life, and, I was struggling or whatever, but who cares about that? Because I don't have time for that. My life is going to be in the celestial kingdom, right? That's all that really matters. That's all that I need to be focused on. So if I was going to do this seriously, if I was going to have kids one day with some guy and, raise them in this church, I would need to know everything about this church, and I would need to be able to stand there and say, hey, I believe in this. And this is where everything falls apart. By this time, I had gone through, college. I had, degrees and whatnot. And I had been through many classes that, taught me psychology and about the world, and I was meeting more people with different viewpoints. And so by the time I go and sit down and start reading the Bible, I'm just like, I feel like I've heard these talking points from, like, men of today. And this is just coming off as, like, misogyny and old world thinking. And I'm like, these are the opinions of men written for men, not women. Like, there's really nothing for women in the Bible or the Book of Mormon or really any book like that, because it's from men. And that was starting to really bother me. It's not like you have a chapter in the Bible that's like, oh, women, you should drink these teas for your hormones, and you should eat this way, Because I was struggling with so many, like, body problems and mental problems, and I was trying to fix them all at the same time, which is, like, a lot. It was a lot. I was dealing with, like, CPTSD, and I was trying to figure that out. I was trying to heal, like, childhood trauma. I was going through it, and I was busy. I was a busy bee. And reading the Bible or the Book of Mormon, like, that was not giving me peace. It was just making me upset. Like, the stuff that they have in there, I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, to blame Eve for the apple, and then, that's why she has, like, terrible pregnancies, and that's goofy. That's some goofy garbage. What I really needed was modern medicine and modern techniques, modern psychology to help me through all the problems I was dealing with. Because the old world stuff was not helping. It was full, like, those religious texts are kind of full of guilt and shame. Like, if your life isn't going well, that's because, you have to be more spiritual, and then God will bless you. But that's not how life works. I say, a lot of people say this, but the fastest way to lose faith is just to sit down and read the Bible, page to page. And not when you're, like, younger, but when you're older and you've had, like, more world experience and you've met multiple people with, like, different cultures and different ideas. Not to say that, like, everything in Mormonism is, like, so terrible, because it's not. I think there's a lot of benefits, and I think if you ignore like the actual scripture stuff and you're focused on like the community stuff, it could be a fine community. Certain wards are nicer than others. I just happen to be in a very toxic ward full of like very materialistic people that really did not like neurodivergence. So that did not play in my favor, but that has nothing to do with the church because I know there's plenty of wards with like nicer people. I've heard, I haven't really experienced, but I've heard. So then I got really deep into church history and stuff was not adding up in the slightest. And I was prepared to stay in the church like forever. I was fine with all my preconceived notions and just my fears about the doctrine or whatever. I just kind of like ignored that stuff because it was what I was taught. I wasn't taught anything else. I wasn't taught to be anything else. Like every morning before I go to seminary, before going to high school, which kept me all sleep deprived, my dad would always tell me, "You're a daughter of God." So that's who I was. I was a daughter of God, right? That's all I could ever be. That's who I was destined to be. But then I started learning about the facts of the church, and it was all coming unraveled. The church was founded by a man named Joseph Smith who said he found some golden plates and then he translated the Book of Mormon and all that. But no one ever actually saw the gold plates. And then the angel took away the plates. That's pretty convenient, don't you think? And his first vision account is really what a lot of, the modern day prophets say is like the end all be all. If that account is wrong, then the whole church is wrong. Well, that first vision account, there's multiple different versions that Joseph Smith would tell throughout the years. And during his time, there was other churches just like his telling similar tales. And the one that the church uses today is nothing like his first account. And if you're going to give an account of a story, you're going to have to go to like the first one someone says. So if they're like 12 and they're like, "This is what happened," then you're going to look at that account because it's going to be the most accurate one because it just happened. But over the years, he completely changed the story. And the first vision is all about him and, God telling him, "Hey, here's my church and I want you to restore it." But in his first account of the first vision, it's nothing about that. It's about him getting forgiven for his sins. And it wasn't about how Jesus and God are like different people, and wasn't that at all. So when I read that, it's like my faith collapsed. Once again, like I said before, I had nothing if I didn't have God, and I didn't have like this idea that I was supposed to go to the celestial kingdom when I'm dead. And now when my faith like unraveled, I just laid on the floor and I didn't know what to do. It was like my world crumbled. The way I saw reality didn't make sense anymore because I just felt like I was completely lied to. And the whole golden plates, well, Joseph Smith was a treasure hunter and he would trick people. He was a little liar. He would say, there's like a spirit here and we're going to find gold. And they would go and dig for gold. And it was called like slippery treasure or something like that. And if you did rituals wrong while you're searching for gold, then the treasure would slip away. The ghost would take the treasure away. And if you read the Book of Mormon, there's passages in there that have that kind of language. And to do some of those rituals, he would like kill animals and stuff. That doesn't really seem like a good man to me. And as a kid, you're taught, like, Joseph Smith would get tar and feathered a lot by the people in his town. And you're taught, like, oh, it's just because he's, like, a spiritual man. And they're being mean because they don't like God. And then you get older and you realize it's because he was doing polyamory. And he was just trying to steal every woman he could. Even some young girls as well. And one of them was just completely devastated when she had to marry him. And he said if he did not marry her, like her family would be killed by, like angels with flaming swords kind of shtick. Like, does that not sound like a whack job? Like that sounds abusive. Cause in modern times, like the church has prophets and none of them really have visions of angels or anything, or Jesus came to be. They don't say anything like that because they know if they did, like people would want to fact check them, but they don't say that. Instead, it's like implied that, the prophets, they see Jesus in the temple and in the Holy of Holies room. But no, this church is made up. Anytime a prophet comes out with like a new prophecy, especially in the latest years, they go back on it because it's so horrendous. Like when I was on my mission, there was a new rule that if your parents were gay, you had to out them and say like, I disown my parents before you could get baptized in the church. That is awful behavior. Like you can't just force a kid to do that to their parents. Because that is so horrendous, it's like the prophet backed out. Like, oh, that wasn't a revelation. Oopsie. All right, then what is a revelation and what is speaking as a man? How am I supposed to trust you? Like that was the only other reason I was in the church is because there was modern day prophets apparently. And then over a few years, they started changing more things like the temple ceremony. I was talking about, holding your bowels, like, cause you cut you cut your stomach up and like you're holding your bowels. They don't exactly tell you that in the temple, but that's what you're doing when you're holding your hand in a cupping shape. I was so offended in the temple when they removed the part where you're supposed to, bow to your husband essentially and yield to your husband like he yields to God. They removed that. I was so offended. This is supposed to be the restored church, the restored temple and whatnot, and you keep changing things. So is it not restored? Continuing revelation? Get out of here. Either God is into this weird stuff or he's not. Does he really not change? Because it seems like he does on a dime. And I didn't talk about it, but when I was a kid, one of the coolest things you learn in the church is like, you'll become a god one day and you could, create your own world. Now, if you tell that to like an artist like me, I'm gonna love that. Now, it's only for men, because apparently men create worlds, which, that as a woman, that doesn't make sense. I thought that was awesome, and I kind of ignored the part where it's just men creating worlds, and women are supposed to just, sit there and be incubators. But yeah, I started really questioning my role as a woman, and maybe I wasn't wrong as a kid thinking, like, I'm not a submissive woman. I don't know why, but I don't exist just to be some man's wife. Like, I want to be a partner with someone. And that was dismantling and falling apart. Women in the church are not treated well. We are second-class citizens. We are below men. We're taught to essentially worship men. Is there any women gods? No. Is there any, like, guidance for women's health or anything like that in the Bible, in practices or anything? No. Because we're not important. Because men don't understand women's problems because they're not women. So why would there be stuff about that in the text? So then I was like, well, maybe I don't want to be Mormon anymore, but maybe I could just be Christian because I like Jesus and I like God. And I went to one Christian service, and coming from like a strict religion, going into like a more casual Christian chapel was just a no. It was like an absolute no. I just couldn't. It was too cringy. I was not having a good time. It was really not that different. Just less uppity, less uptightness, but the same. And I realized at that point that maybe religion is just not for me, and I don't know what I want to do, but it's not this. So then I started researching like other religions, and for a while I fell into nihilism and all that bullcrap, but now I'm just, I think, caring for myself has kind of becoming like my own religion. I don't know, like self-love and trying to love other people is my religion, and that's it, and that's fine. I don't believe that there's any like master creator or anything. I just think we live in a constant recycling of energy. And that's it. And I don't know if you guys want me to talk about what my new ideals are or anything. But yeah, I'll probably do that in another video if you guys are interested in that. But coming out of religion was the best thing for me. Now, it was hard because I had to unlearn a lot of, the brainwashing and the mental damage that the church did to my brain, but it's been worth it, even if it's taken me like 6 years to fully undo a lot of trauma. And it's weird, like, overcoming everything and figuring out solutions to all those issues, because for a long time my personality was trauma. So when you're not trauma, you're like, well, who am I? And like, what can I be now, where that I'm not some daughter of God, I'm just me? And who is that? So that's something I'm still continuing to figure out. But okay, so since it's the end, I will say there's certain things in Mormonism that I think are beneficial. Like, they teach you how to fast, which is very good for the body. They teach you discipline and, like sexual discipline, discipline of the mind, of your thoughts. That's great. The only problem is they also teach you like guilt and shame to go along with it, which is not really needed. They focus a lot on repentance, which is can make you like very OCD. Like, I kind of had like religious OCD. They baptize kids at like 8 years old and tell them, well, you're perfect now. Now, once you you're at the age of accountability at 8 years old. That is ridiculous. That's a child. They still need to do a lot of mistakes before they like get better. So telling a kid at 8 years old that you're perfect now that you've been baptized is cruel, in my opinion. It's so cruel. And even when I was a member, I thought that was cruel, because that starts a kid on the path of guilt and shame. And maybe I'll talk about that in another video, but that's not helpful. That's not good. The church teaches to be charitable, which is a good thing, but it's a bad thing because they teach that you're supposed to give the money to the church, so you do, and now they're sitting on like billions of dollars. Billions of money that they could be giving to the poor, but they don't. So it's kind of under false pretenses, and like on Fast Sunday they tell you to give even more of your money, which you think, oh, I'm helping the poor, but then they don't use it on the poor. They're just sitting on it, and that makes me upset. There's a weird teaching that in the millennium, when Jesus comes back, they're going to need that money. Jesus needs money? Like, are you hearing yourself? Does that make any sense? No. Teaching things like virtue and choice and accountability is a great thing to, teach to kids. I think that stuff is fine. Teaching polygamy to little girls is very disheartening to hear, because you're like, just... The church likes to say, oh, men and women are equal, but they're not, because women are treated like underclass citizens. We really are. And to think about being in the next life, being some god's concubine, ain't very fun. It's not fun, and it's just sad. The church teaches modesty, but the church also teaches that if you wear anything inappropriate, you essentially become pornography for men. As if men are like wild creatures that can't handle their own sexual desires. Like, they can't... That is ridiculous. And that's like almost abusive towards the men. Like, treating them like wild animals, essentially. So while there are good things in the church, there's like the other half that's bad. I wish one day they'll fix those problems, but, we'll see, and I won't be there to see it, honestly, because I don't care anymore. But yeah, this was kind of my Mormon story. But yeah, I'm good. I'm chilling. I'm vibing. I'm feeling like the happiest I've ever been in my entire life, because I've, fixed my ADHD problems. I've worked on my body and stuff, fixed that up. I can walk again. I'm not struggling anymore. And now I can finally become an individual. I'm a little old for that, but that's okay. We all have our different timelines, right? But yeah, that's about it.